I'm an ex-Mormon who went through the secret Mormon temple ceremonies, and they made me feel uncomfortable. The very first time that I went through a Mormon temple endowment ceremony was the first time in my life that I had the thought, it feels like I'm in a cult. If talking openly and honestly about my experiences in the Mormon temple makes me a hater, then I guess I'll always be a hater because I think informed consent matters, and I didn't have that before I went through the temple. I've talked before about my thoughts and feelings going through a Mormon temple endowment ceremony for the first time, but a lot of people had questions on specifically what actually happens during those ceremonies, so I am going to talk about that. What happens during an initiatory, what happens during an endowment ceremony specifically. If you are a Mormon, or if this would make you uncomfortable in any way, this is your opportunity to scroll away. I personally don't think that it's hateful in any way for me to talk about what happens in the temple, and if somebody thinks that it's evil that I'm talking about it, that I'm being open, honest, and educational about Mormon temples, I think that's a red flag. So starting at the very beginning, before we even get inside the temple, there are requirements to be allowed to go in the temple and participate in these ceremonies. In order to go inside the temple and to participate in these ceremonies, you firstly need to be a Mormon. You need to go through an interview with the man who is the leader of your congregation, known as a bishop. He will ask you a series of questions to determine if you are worthy to enter the temple or not. Here is part 1 of those questions and part 2. You can pause to read if you're interested. Some of the questions include things like, are you moral in your thoughts and your behaviors? Are you sexually pure? Do you keep the law of chastity? Do you sustain the leaders of the church? And do you pay a 10% tithe? One of the requirements for going through the temple is that you are a full tithe payer, which means that that member is actively paying 10% of their income to the church as tithing. If you make it through that interview and your bishop deems you worthy enough to go in the temple, then you will get what's called a temple recommend, which is just a little slip of paper saying that you are worthy and you can go to the temple. Now, if that person hasn't been through an endowment ceremony before, most Mormons have very little preparation for what is going to happen. Part of the reason that many Mormons get so upset when I talk about what happens in the temple is because it's all supposed to be very secret. There is a temple prep class, but it doesn't actually tell you what's going to happen. When I went through a Mormon temple endowment ceremony for the first time, I was 19 years old. I didn't know what was going to happen at all. The only thing I was prepared for was the fact that I was going to be wearing garments for the first time and that I would wear them for the rest of my life. I didn't know what would happen in the initiatory. I didn't know what would happen during the ceremony. Nothing. Even though my whole family generations back was Mormon, it was very against the rules to talk about what happens in the ceremony with people who haven't been through it. So I had no idea. That is very normal. Most Mormons have no idea what's coming before they go through. The first thing that happens in the temple when you're going to go through an endowment ceremony for the first time is the washing and anointing, otherwise known as the initiatory. The member will sit in a chair in a small room with curtains around you. Men and women are completely separated at this point, so men go to a different room than women. In the past, the member would be wearing only this little poncho that's called a shield, like you would be fully nude underneath the shield. Now, what my experience was that you put on the garments before you put on the shield, so you're not entirely naked. A drop of water is placed on your head, and you are blessed to be clean of the blood and sins of this generation. During this blessing, the officiator mentions all different parts of your body, like your head, your eyes, your lips, your breasts, your bowels, etc. And they touch near each body part while it is mentioned. Next, a drop of olive oil is placed on your head, and you are blessed in becoming a king/queen and a priest/priestess unto the Most High God hereafter to rule and reign in the house of Israel forever. The blessing repeats all of those body parts and the touching of those areas. The member is then given permission to wear these white underwear known as temple garments, and they are charged to wear them throughout their lives, day and night. And then the member is given a new name. The officiator would say, with this garment I give you a new name which you should always remember and which you must keep sacred and never reveal. I remember going through this part and feeling like the name was very special to me. The names are usually from the scriptures, and although I thought the name was special to me, it was not. The names are dependent on the day of the month, so all the women who go through on the first of the month get the same name, and then same for all the men, and so on and so forth through the month. My new name when I went through the temple was Leah. Now, before we get into the rest of the temple ceremony, it's important to note that there have been many changes made to the temple ceremony and initiatory over the years. Some of them are more notable than others. Like we talked about with the shield, you used to be fully nude under the shield, and now you're at least wearing your underwear. Something that was in the temple ceremony prior to the 1930s was the oath of vengeance. You would promise to never cease praying to God for him to avenge the blood of the prophets, Joseph Smith and Hiram, and to teach your children and grandchildren, and so on and so forth, to do the same thing. I obviously didn't make that promise because it was changed before I went through. There's also the blood oath that was part of the temple ceremony before 1990. Before 1990, you would vow that rather than reveal the secrets of the temple, you would rip out your own tongue, slit your throat, and slash open your bowels. Again, I did not make those promises because those changes were made before I went through the temple. I am going to make multiple parts because it takes a while to explain everything. So this was the initiatory, and the next one I'm going to talk about what happens in the endowment ceremony, the clothing, the handshakes, the prayer circle, etc. And then I'm also hoping to make one talking about the second anointing, which most Mormons don't know about at all. Again, I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way by sharing any of this. I just think that education and informed consent are important. I think that people should know what happens in the temple before they go through. I think they should know the history of what happened in the temple before they go through, and I wish that I had been given that opportunity.